Hey guys, second measure with the video for you guys. In today's video, we're going to compare the new iPhone 14 Pro with the iPhone 8 Plus that was released 5 years ago in 2017. In this video, we're going to take a look at the hardware, the software, overall battery life, camera, and much more, and kind of give you guys a rundown if you're considering to upgrade from the 8 Plus to the iPhone 14 Pro. I just want to know what the main differences are between these two great devices that are pretty much good devices even in 2022. So let's dive right into it. As you can see in my hand here, this is the new 14 Pro here, the latest model from Apple, and then the 8 Plus, as we mentioned, released back in 2017. It's hard to believe it's a 5-year-old phone, but again, this phone, it still works phenomenal. So if you look at side by side, just doing a quick comparison, both of the phones actually weigh about the same in terms of ounces, just a little bit heavier on the 14 Pro than the iPhone 8 Plus. But when you hold it side by side, you'll be amazed at how much has changed in terms of the display. You have a 6.1 inch display, and this is a 5.5 inch display. Although the body of the iPhone 8 Plus does look bigger when you hold it side by side, but because there is no longer a fingerprint or the top notch over here, you have more real estate in terms of space, and that seems to be the way most phones are now, without any buttons, just all glass display here. Talking about the glass display, you have this, which is now Super Retina XDR display versus just Retina HD display. What does that really mean? You have OLED display versus a regular LCD display here. Of course, you have that dynamic island that's been the new feature on the 14 Pro and the Pro Max lineup, and of course other things we'll discuss in terms of hardware. But if we quickly take a look at the back of these two phones, you'll notice a couple things have changed here. Again, the camera is a big thing. Of course, you have three now cameras here. Now there's an upgrade to a 48 megapixel camera versus two 12 megapixel camera, and then you'll notice here things around Apple logo, and then this word iPhone no longer exists on actual iPhone back itself. Also, you'll notice here, of course, difference in terms of the bezels here. You got rounded bezel versus flat on the newer lineup, and it's not something completely new for the 14 lineup, but it is something we seen starting with the 12 lineup, going to the flat bezel, and then of course, if you look and side by side, you'll see the difference here. You'll notice the iPhone 14 Pro does look a little bit thicker, and that is the case. It is a thicker body phone when you hold it side by side. Now, one of the big things between these two phones and the hardware is that this thing right here, it's a Wave 5G capability for the US model here. Unfortunately, the 8 Plus doesn't have that. So if you're looking for 5G, this is where you're going to be thinking of upgrading. Of course, 5G is quite new to iPhone 14 Pro, since iPhone 12 and above does have 5G, but it is a big difference between these two phones. The other thing to mention is the physical SIM card. So you notice on the iPhone 8 here, there's a little hole here. That's the actual physical SIM card you put in. Unfortunately, if we look at on the 14 Pro here, there is no physical SIM any longer on the US model. That means you have to use eSIM card when it comes to using the new iPhone 14 Pro. And other hardware differences between that you may not see here is on the 14 Pro has new sensors which allow you to do basically, if you're in a crash, it has crash detection, which will notify emergency services. Unfortunately, the 8 Plus doesn't have that capability, even though it is running the latest version, iOS 16 on it. Other display differences on the iPhone 14 Pro versus the iPhone 8 here, it's going to be on the 14 Pro, you have an upgraded refresh rate of 120 hertz versus 60 on the 8 Plus. You also have this always on, which we noticed from the beginning, ability, which you can turn on in the settings here. Unfortunately, that will not be available on the iPhone 8 Plus for you. Of course, talking about hardware, there's also a change in the chip set. So the iPhone 8 Plus had A11 chip, where the iPhone 14 Pro had the latest A16 Bionic chip with upgraded RAM as well. So why do you mention about that? It's because the upgrade software makes, when it comes to playing games, heavy graphic game, it definitely makes a big difference, and that is something we want to mention. Now, moving on to the next big item, which is going to be the camera here. If you look in the camera here, we already saw physically there is 3 camera versus 2. That's no given. There's been lots of upgrade because of 5-year difference between the phone, but by taking a look at it, you'll notice here on the zoom of the photo here, optical, you have 15 versus just only 2x the zoom. Things like portrait mode is actually available on both devices here. Of course, you can kind of go ahead and do that. Some things you'll notice here, some features missing on the portrait mode is There's also square on the iPhone 8. The square is no longer an option here, as you can see here. And then moving on to things like the video itself here. Now there's been a lot of improvement in terms of video here. As you can see here, both of the phones can record up to 4K in both phones, but of course on the iPhone 14 Pro here comes a new feature, which is action mode. As you can see, basically when you're on the go and recording, it will give you much better stabilization versus the iPhone 8 here. And also things like a night mode isn't available on the iPhone 8 for photography and general photos as well. Things like cinematic mode, which again was introduced on the iPhone 13 Pro lineup, won't be available on the 8 Plus here. So those are some upgrades. Of course, the camera has been a big upgrade for these two phones, and that's no given here. Other things you'll probably notice between these two devices is that it's battery life. So you have the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 8 Plus here versus the 14 Plus. Now, the size of the battery is quite different as well, and the battery life that we get on the 14 Pro here, if we go into it, it's a massive 23 hours of video playback, which again is one of the bigger batteries we've seen here, and that's going to give you lots of life. You can pretty much, if you're light to medium user, you can pretty much go through the whole day with the iPhone 14 Pro. Now, on the other hand, the iPhone 8 Plus here does have a decent sized battery, but the battery life is about 14 hours in terms of video playback at 100%. Now this battery has degraded over time usage, so probably like at a 76%, you're about getting probably 7-8 hours before you need to charge. Again, that's kind of the difference here between the phones, is that of course the battery with age comes the deterioration of the playback for the standby that you get between these two devices. So those are going to be some of the main things. Now, both of the phones, if we want to talk about other things, is the software. As you can see, both of the phones are running iOS 16, and which is a good thing because iOS 16 is the latest update, and the iPhone 8 and the 8 Plus are the last kind of models that were able to get the iOS update, and that's big for the iPhone 8 Plus. That means this phone will probably be good for another 2 years or so at the given minimum. Again, we're not sure if iOS 17 one does come out, if the iPhone 8 will support it, but that's one thing you probably keep in back of your mind, is that this is the latest version of the phone that gets this update. So again, it could mean that the iPhone 8 Plus is pretty much at the end of its life of getting major update, and that's kind of no surprise considering the phone itself again has aged over 5 years. Again, although Apple does support with security updates, something you'll probably want to keep in mind. So when it comes to pretty much most of the apps are going to be compatible on both devices. We haven't noticed any apps, at least of the major app, that are not compatible on iOS 16, and that's because that's the latest version. So when it comes to things like around gaming, from light to heavy gaming, both of the phones does do pretty good. Now when it comes to gaming, the 8 Plus will of course not be as great as the 14 Pro because of those RAM upgrades and the chip and the hardware update itself. But of course, if you're looking to grow heavy graphic gaming like you would do on a console, probably the 14 Pro is be your choice to go. And in terms of other software, you notice here between both of the phones, pretty much we're able to kind of go open up any app, start using it without any issues, and we haven't seen any noticeable difference in performance between the phones in terms of apps crashing, anything like that. But when it comes to opening up app and using all of that, we noticed the 14 Pro, of course, 5-year-old phone, it's going to beat it any day given opening up apps, just launching things much quicker than the iPhone 8 Plus here. Now let's move on to the next item on this phone, is why you would consider one over the another. So why would you consider the iPhone 8 Plus, or if you want to stick to the iPhone 8 Plus? Now it's not a bad choice to stick with it considering that it is a popular phone. It has that fingerprint touch reader, but if you're comparing both of the phones, probably the one thing you'll notice is, or if you're looking to buy either of the phones, is the price and your budget. The iPhone 8 Plus here, you can get it around $150 to $200, and most of the time you'll probably buy it pre-owned, used from eBay or Amazon, which will leave the link in the description section. So again, that's kind of the thing. The other thing on the phone is, again, as you mentioned, it's a classic design with the fingerprint reader. If you're still attached to it, that's probably the couple of good points about the iPhone 8 Plus. Now when it comes to the iPhone 14 Pro here, now a lot has changed. We mentioned that, of course, the display here, bigger display in terms of real estate, brighter display. It does have around close to 1800 nit of peak brightness. When it comes to even performance, when we do start doing some performance testing that we have seen here with the CPU and the RAM, you get around 2.5 times faster in terms of some of the benchmark we have seen here. Of course, along with that is updated refresh rate of 120 hertz, which makes things a lot much better. Big, huge upgrade when it comes to the camera space here. And then, of course, the battery life, around 32% longer battery life because of the size of the battery and the efficiency the software brings in, because iOS 16 is meant for the iPhone 14 Pro. Of course, there's been updates to things like the Bluetooth itself, the Wi-Fi 6, of course, network compatibility as well. And of course, between these two phones, it's about software update. If you're looking for a long-term phone, you're going to pay $1,000, but it will be good for at least 5 to 6 years, no doubt. And if you're not looking to go further than that. So that's kind of the comparison between the iPhone 14 Pro and the iPhone 8 Plus. Whether you're thinking of upgrading, is the upgrade worth it? Of course, it is worth it if you're looking to pay that $1,000 price point. But the iPhone 8 Plus will get your job done for basic stuff like calling, texting, browsing, and all of your popular apps that you use. So that's our review. We want to hear from you guys. If you guys have experience using either of the devices, if you guys upgraded, whatever it is, leave a comment in the comment section. And while you're at it, please make sure that like and subscribe button. Thanks for watching, guys. See you guys next time.